In this video, we are going to discuss GS3 revision marathon, that is part 1 Indian economy. In this video, we are going to discuss part 1. In this part 1, we are going to discuss 5 chapters: employment, inclusive growth, manufacturing, fiscal policy, GST, and federalism. Before that, I want to ask you one question. What are the causes of persistent high food inflation in India? What are the causes of persistent high food inflation in India? It was asked in the General Studies 3 paper in 2024. Now, here is the problem. By the middle of 2025, food prices in India were not rising, they were falling actually. Food inflation entered deflation in June 2025. In October, food prices recorded the largest monthly decline in the present CPI series. So, a candidate who prepared that question the way it was set, who learned the causes of high food inflation and stopped, is now carrying an answer whose factual context has fundamentally changed. And this is not one stale question, it is a pattern. It is a pattern. So, you were taught MGNREGA guarantees 100 days. It has been replaced and the statutory guarantee went up to 125 days. Then you were taught India will not meet 50% renewable by 2030. And the commitment India actually made, it already has. And you were taught logistics cost are 13 to 14% of GDP. The official estimate is 7.97 as per DPIIT NCEAR financial year 2024. 2024. You are taught food processing is a sunrise sector. Its share of gross value added peaked in 2018 to 19 and has fallen since. Four things almost every source still teaches. Four things almost every source still teaches. All four are maybe out of date. So what is this marathon? So what this marathon is, for this, I did not build this from the syllabus. I built it from the question paper, that is previous year's questions, and 118 questions. So every economy, agriculture, and infrastructure question the UPSC has asked in General Studies 3 paper from 2013 to 2025. I laid them out by syllabus head and I let them decide the architecture. A chapter exists in this marathon because the corpus demands it, not because the syllabus lists a heading. The corpus means the previous year questions from 2013 to 2025, which were UPSC asked. That single decision changes everything downstream. It tells you where the weight is. Agriculture's water and cropping head has produced 19 questions. MSP and food security 17. Fiscal policy 13. 49 questions of 118, more than 2/5 of the corpus. They get the time that share deserves. It tells you where the silence is. Where the silence is. GST and fiscal federalism has not been asked since 2020. Investment models and PPP not since 2022. And when I tested the usual advice that recently asked areas are exhausted, the corpus does not support it. What is meant by corpus? I already told you from 2013 to 2025 previous year questions. Several recently tested heads returned quickly. Recency does not guarantee exhaustion. So dormancy is not a dead area. It is a queue. So what I will not to do? I will not give you a number without telling you where it came from. I will not give you a number without telling you where it came from. Every chapter ends with a source ledger. Every figure traces to a government document and where I could not source something. The script says so, and I do not say it on air. It on air. And I will not hide it when the government contradicts itself. That happens more than you would expect. One department's annual report gives two different irrigation figures, two paragraphs apart. The land records report claims 99.81% in one place and 97.27% in another. Power sector's own table contains a row that is arithmetically impossible, an all India average higher than every single component. When that happens, I will tell you both numbers, which one to use and why. That is a verified table, and there is one in every chapter, because the worst thing that can happen to you in that examination hall is not forgetting a figure. It is confidently writing one that was wrong. It is confidently writing one that is wrong. Actually, how to use this? How to use this marathon? Three things. And then we start. One, do not take notes on the data. Do not take notes on the data. Every chapter ends with a revision grid. Every number, one line each. It is already written. Take notes on the arguments instead, because the argument is what the examiner is making. Because the argument is what the examiner is marking. The second one, watch for the sentences I read slowly. Those are main ammunition, written to be used almost as they stand. There are over 40 across this marathon. If you learn nothing else, learn those. The third one, every question is answered once. If a question sits at the boundary of two topics, I tell you which chapter owns it and where the other one cross references. Nothing here is repeated to fill time. I'm going to structure. What is the structure? Here, three parts, above 5 hours in total. Each part stands alone. Watch them in any order. And one last thing about how the answer in this marathon are built. Almost every scene follows the same shape, because almost every question in this paper is a policy evaluation question wearing different clothes. State what has been achieved. Name the paradox. Name the paradox. Inside it, explain why the paradox exists structurally. Then say what would fix it. That is reform. So that is the shape of a 15-mark answer in this paper. You will see it in every chapter, and by part 3 you will be able to build it yourself on a topic I never taught you. So that is the shape. That is the shape of a 15-mark answer in this paper. Like achievement to paradox, paradox to structure, structure to reform. That is the shape. You will see it in every chapter, and by part 3 you will be able to build it yourself on a topic I never taught you. because that is the actual objective here. This paper does not reward what you know about the Indian economy, it rewards what you can argue about it. Because that is the objective actually here. This paper does not reward what you know about the Indian economy, it rewards what you can argue about it. One was about how India produces, earns taxes and spends. Part 2 is about the sector where 43% of Indians still work and which produces under a fifth of what the country earns. But gap is the agricultural question, and every one of the fifth and every one of the 52 past questions in this part is some version of it. But I want you, but I want to warn you about the shape of this part because it surprises people. Because it surprises people, Indian agriculture has already transformed. Farmers diversified into horticulture and high value crops years ago, largely without being asked to. The policy did not follow. Price support, procurement, storage, and credit are still built around the two crops that Green Revolution was designed for. So, part 2 is not the story of a stagnant sector waiting for reform, waiting for reform. It is the story of a sector that reformed itself and a policy architecture that has not caught up. Part 1 and 2 were about what India earns and what it grows. Part 1, what it earns, India, and part 2, what it grows. And comes to part 3. Part 3 is about what it builds and about who pays for it. 21 questions, and they cluster in two places: how infrastructure gets financed when the budget cannot fund all of it, and whether the thing that gets built actually works. And there is a pattern running through all three chapters here that I want you listening for from the start. In every sector in this part, the asset arrives before the institution that is supposed to make it work. First asset, then institution. The toll gantry arrives before the system for correcting a wrong deduction. Airport arrives before the route economics. The metro arrives before anyone is accountable for how many people move. The sensors arrive before the city knows who owns which plot. India has become very good at building the thing. Part 3 is about what has not yet learned to build. So, this is all about the introduction. Then we are moving to chapter number 1, that is employment and the quality of work. What is the employment and what is the quality of work? From this chapter 2024, one question asked that is related regarding labor codes, and 2023 it asked measurement methodology, and 23 care economy and monetized economy, and 2022 and 2015 UPSC asked jobless growth, and 2016 and 2014 regarding employability, and again 2014 demographic dividend question were asked in UPSC CAC TS3 paper examination. So what is the paradox here? India produces growth, India produces workers, and it connects two wars each decade. India produces growth, India produces workers, and it connects the two words each decade. This What sentence is the chapter? Hold the shape of it, because every question in this chapter is a variation on it. Whether the examiner says jobless growth or demographic dividend or employability or labor codes. Whether the examiner says jobless growth or demographic dividend or employability or labor codes. Then we are moving to the second scene, that is the language and why it is worth 2 marks. That is India's labor market. 4 indicators. Learn the relationship, not the definitions. What are the 4 indicators? Labor force is the working plus those actively seeking work. That is called as labor force. Labor force is the working plus those actively seeking work. A student preparing for an exam is not unemployed. A retired person is not unemployed. Only the willing and searching are counted. Comes to LFPR. How many of the working age population are in the labor market at all? How many of the working age population are in the labor market at all? This is called as LFPR. And WPR. How many are actually working? The gap between LFPR and WPR is the unemployed. The single relationship is more useful than the 3 memorized definitions. So comes to the unemployment rate. What is the unemployment rate? What is the definition of unemployment rate? The unemployed as a share of the labor force, not the population. Now comes to the numbers, and every one of them is persons aged 15 and above. Usual status. January to December 2026 from the PLFS Annual Report 2025. All India LFPR is 59.3%, rural 62.8%, and urban 52.2%. Then comes to WPR, 57.4%. Unemployment rate is 3.1%. The unemployment rate is 3.1%. Comes to female LFPR. All India LFPR is 59.3%, rural 62.8%, urban 52.2%. Then WPR is 57.4%. The unemployment rate is 3.1%. Then comes to female LFPR is 40%. Rural 45.9 against urban 27.7. Male LFPR is 79.1%, rural 80.5, urban 76.2. When it comes to youth, aged 15 to 29, LFPR is 46.0%, WPR is 41.4%. Hold these two, we come back to them. Then we are moving to scene number 3, that is 4-label rule. What is the 4-label rule? Every employment number you write must carry 4 labels. What are the 4 labels? First one indicator, second one reference period, third one age group, and fourth one measurement basis. For example, PLFS Annual Report 2025. LFPR for person aged 15 and above was 59.3%. Usual status January to December 2025. You have to write in the answer like this. Not like this. LFPR is 59.3%. This is wrong. You have to write like this. PLFS Annual Report 2025. It is okay. Have to write like this. LFPR for persons aged 15 and above was 59.3%, usual status January to December. In this indicator, reference period, age group, measurement basis. Age group 15 and above, reference period January to December 2025, indicator LFPR, then measurement basis, usual status. So this is the way you have to write an answer. These sentences in your answer. Two measurement bases and they are not interchangeable. Usual status. What is meant by usual status? A 365-day reference period. It captures the principal activity plus subsidiary work. It captures what? The principal activity plus subsidiary work. It produces the lower unemployment rate because a person who worked at all during the year is counted as unemployed. It produces the lower unemployment rate because a person who worked at all during the year is counted as employed, not unemployed, employed. Then this is usual status. Then comes to current weekly status. What is meant by current weekly status? A 7-day reference period it is called as. It produces the higher unemployment rate and it picks up the short-term and seasonal joblessness that usual status hides. So same country, same year, different instruments. The gap between them is not an error. It is information about intermittent work. About intermittent work. And the series has a break in it. What is that break? And when it has taken break? Until 2024, PLFS reported July to June survey years 2017-18, 2022-23 and 23-24. But from April 2025, the survey was revamped. Calendar year annual reports plus quarterly bulletins plus monthly bulletins. Calendar year annual reports plus quarterly bulletins plus monthly bulletins. So this is the way changed, revamped the survey. MOSPI, Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation, has backcast the calendar series to 2022. So never place a July-June figure beside January-December figure without saying so. Because June-July is different, January-December is different from 2025 April. Female LFPR at 41.7% belongs to 2023-24 July-June. And then female LFPR at 40.0% belongs to January-December 2025. Setting them side by side. Manufacturers a decline that the data does not support because that is different thing and this is different thing. That is different way, this is different way because survey has revamped. So write this, not that. Not female participation has fallen. You have to write like this. The series changed base in 2025. Comparisons across the break require the recast calendar year figures. So the measurement answer for the 2023 question is, it asked for the methodology and for improvements, 4 improvements defensible and specific. And the first one is frequency was the binding gap and it has been closed. Monthly bulletins from April 2025 against a single annual survey. Monthly bulletins. Then comes to underemployment remains unmeasured as a headline. This is the second one. A 3.1% unemployment rate in an economy where 57.4% of adults work and most work informally. Second one, what? Underemployment remains unmeasured as a headline. A 3.1% unemployment rate in an economy where 57.4% of adults work and most work informally is measuring the wrong scarcity. The scarcity is productive work, not work. And third one, usual status flatters. A person employed for 30 days in a year counts as employed. Report current weekly status alongside a standard, not as a secondary table. Comes to the fourth one, the series break needs a published bridge. The recasting exists. The concordance is not prominent enough to stop misuse. So moving to the next scene, that is where Indians actually work. Structure of employment PLFS 2025, percentage of workers by broad industry division, usual status, rural and urban together. Comes to agriculture part. Agriculture in 2022, 45.5%, 2024, 44.8%, and then 2025, 43.0%. Comes to manufacturing, 2022, 11.2%, 2024, 11.6%, and 2025, 12.1%. So where the rest of work? Construction 13.4% in 2022, 12.0 in 25. Trade, hotels and restaurants 12.2, 12.0 to 12.9. Other services 11.5 to 13.1. Underneath that, rural agriculture 57.2% and urban agriculture 7.5% and rural female 72.7%. So two movements matter here and they point opposite ways. A first movement is agriculture share is falling. Agriculture share is falling. And the second one is structural formation is happening. Agricultural share is falling 45.5 to 43.0% in 3 years. Structural formation is happening, but manufacturing is absorbing only slowly from 11.2 to 11.2 to 12.1% over the same period. Rising and work saying so because the standard answer claims it is stuck. It is not stuck. It is rising a roughly. It is a rising by roughly 3/10 of percentage point a year, 3/10, which at the rate takes decades to matter. That is the honest formulation. Not that manufacturing cannot absorb, but that it is absorbing at a pace, the demographic window will not wait for. And a phrasing rule here, that series runs 22, 2024, 2025. There is no 2023 observation in it. So do not say manufacturing employment has risen 3 years running. So you have to say it rose from 11.2 to 12.1% between 2022 and 2025. Same fact, and it survives a check. So then we are this is where Indians actually work. And moving to next scene, that is paradox in 4 dimensions. This is the framework that opens any employment answer. Any employment answer. The first one is employment without productivity. Agriculture holds 43% of workers and a far smaller share of output. And second one, education without employability. Degrees expand faster than workplace readiness. No skills. Third one, growth without absorption. The fastest growing sectors are capital and skill intensive. And fourth one, shortage alongside surplus. Employers report vacancies while graduates report joblessness because skills, locations, and requirements do not match. 4 lines, one framework, it opens the 2015, 2022, and 2014 questions equally. Headline rate hides the one that matters. What is that? The all India unemployment rate is 3.1%. Now take the youth numbers from a moment ago, that is moment ago. LFPR 46.0 against WPR 41.4. So do the arithmetic aloud with me. 46.0 less 41.4 is 4.6. Divide that by 46.0. Youth unemployment rate is about 10%, more than 3 times the headline. Youth unemployment. Youth unemployment is about 10%, more than 3 times the headline. That single ratio is the strongest evidence for dimension 4. Shortage alongside surplus. It converts shortage alongside surplus from an assertion into a measurement. And jobless growth, a caution here. The phrase is the examiner's, not an economist's conclusion. Jobless growth. It does not mean no jobs are created. It means employment grows slower than output. The precise concept is employment elasticity, and using it instead of that slogan is a mark. In the demographic window, the dividend peaks around 2030. After that, the ratio turns. A young population is a potential source. Young population is a potential resource. Human capital is the actual resource. The distinction is what the 2014 question was testing. So what is the care economy? You might heard it. The 2023 question asked for a distinction and a mechanism. So it gives both. The monetized economy is activity transacted for payment counted in GDP. What is monetized economy? The monetized economy is activity transacted for payment counted in GDP. Comes to the care economy. The care economy is the work of caring for children, the elderly, and the sick, and of running households. Essential, largely unpaid, overwhelmingly performed by women, and therefore invisible to national accounts. So comes to the distinction. The distinction is not semantic. What is not counted is not planned for, not funded, and not protected. The distinction is what? Not semantic. What is not counted is not planned for, and not funded, and not protected. So how care work enters the monetized economy? With 3 routes: recognize, reduce, redistribute. Comes to recognize part. Measure it. Time use data makes the burden visible. Then reduce. Infrastructure that cuts unpaid hours. Water, fuel, child care, elder care. Come to redistribute. Care services as paid employment, which simultaneously creates jobs and releases women into other work. And it comes to the third one, that is investment, the third route. Note what the third route does. Investment in the care economy both creates employment and enables employment. Care as a paid So investment in the care economy both creates employment and enables employment. That sentence is the answer's hinge. And return to the number, urban female LFPR is 27.7% against rural 45.9%. The urban deficit is not an education deficit. It is a care and safety deficit. This is all about care economy. Then we are moving to next scene, that is the two legislative resets. What are the two statutes and what sits behind them? The two statutes changed the employment architecture. First one industrial, one rural. Both turn on state level implementation. The four labor codes in force 21 November 2025. 29 central labor laws consolidated into four. Four. The codes, the code on wages 2019, a statutory minimum wage for all workers and a national floor wage below which no state may fix its minimum. And second one, the Industrial Relations Code 2020. This is dispute resolution, two-member tribunals comes under this act, comes under this code. And next one, the Code on Social Security 2020. The first statutory recognition of gig and platform workers. Then moving to next code, that is the Occupational Safety, Health and Working Conditions Code 2020. So mandatory appointment letters comes under this code. So operative provisions worth naming here. What are the operative provisions? The national floor wage, appointment letters for every worker, portable social security through a universal account number, equal benefits for fixed term employees with gratuity after 1 year, an aggregator contribution towards gig worker social security, and the inspector replaced by an inspector cum facilitator. And the inspector replaced by an inspector cum facilitator. So the balanced assessment, the 2024 question demands what? It asked for merits, demerits, and progress. The 2024 candidate answered before the course existed in force because 21st November 2025, 21st November 2025, it came into force. So the 2024 candidate answered before the course existed in force. So you are answering after. Say so. 5 concerns each defensible. 5 concerns. First one is the retrenchment and closure. The retrenchment and closure. Threshold rises from 100 workers to 300. Industry calls it flexible. Unions calls it lost security. And second one, recognition of gig workers is not delivery of benefits to gig workers. That is recognition only, not benefits. And third one, universal protection needs fiscal and administrative capacity that has to be built, not assumed. Third one is what? Universal protection needs fiscal and administrative capacity that has to be built, not assumed. And fourth one, labor is concurrent. Labor is concurrent subject. State rules and enforcement capacity vary, so outcomes will diverge. And fifth one, an appointment letter is not a living wage. Formalization on paper is not decent work. When it comes to the status precision, what is the status precision here? This is where marks are won or lost in the examination. The codes are operative law and the 29 subsumed statutes stand repealed. What remains pending is the final central and state rules. Do not write that the codes are proposed or awaiting implementation. Comes to the rural reset. What is the rural reset here? That is VBJ Ramji Act 2025, Act 36 of 2025. Comments 1st July 2026, repealing NG and NR EGA the same day. Vikasit Bharat Guarantee for Rozgar and Ajivaka Mission Gramin, introduced in Lok Sabha on 16th December 2025, passed by both houses on 18th December 2025, assented on 21st December 2025, Act number 36 of 2025. In force across all rural areas with effect from 1st July 2026. Comes to MGNREGA 2005. Together with all rules, notifications, schemes, orders, and guidelines made under it, stands repealed from the same date by Gazette notification issued 11th May 2026. So, clause 37 carries the repeal and the transitional powers and transitional provisions rather than powers, it say. Clause 37 carries what? Clause 37 carries the repeal and the transitional provisions. So the first one is because almost every source gets the direction wrong. You have to say this first. The Act's long little carries a statutory guarantee of 125 days. The entitlement was raised, not downgraded. 100 days became 125. Any answer that treats the replacement as a dilution of the guarantee has the first fact backwards. Any answer that treats the replacement as a dilution of the guarantee has the first fact backwards. And comes to the money. 30,000 crore under MGNREGS. That's 95,692 crores. VBG Ramji Union share is 1,25,692 crore combined together, these three. Against 88,000 crore in the revised estimate 2025-2026 budget estimates, revised estimates. So up to 42.8%. That 30,000 crore is not full year allocation to a repealed statute. These 30,000 crores in budget estimate 2026-2027 Mahatma Gandhi NREGS. These 30,000 crores, a bridge, not a parallel program, a commitment to 30 June 2026, and in pending liabilities, those are 30,000 crores. So, 30,000 crore, I am repeating, another 30,000 crore is not a full year allocation to a repealed statute. A Rajya Sabha written reply by Minister of by the Minister of State for Rural Development on 30 March 2026 states that it is expected to meet the financial commitments under Mahatma Gandhi NREGS until the VBG Ramji Act commences, together with admissible pending liabilities. It is a bridge for the first quarter of the next financial year plus arrears. So you have to write this, not that. Never MGNREGA cut by 66%. Never. Always the combined figure, both components named and the bridge explained. The press framing is arithmetically real. 88,000 crore in revised estimates down to 30,000 crore. And analytically misleading, which is exactly why it circulates. This is the most likely factual error in the 2026 hall. State share gap and it answers the arguable question. The mission's full annual requirement is about 1,51,282 crores. Full mission requirement. This is 1,51,282 crores, including state share. About 55,590 crore must come from states because cost shared 60 is to 40, 60 from union, 40 from states. Punjab and Telangana raised exactly this at the pre-budget meeting. So state the tension precisely and do not resolve it in anyone's favor. The entitlement is statutory and it is larger, but its financing now depends on state fiscal capacity in a way the old architecture did not. A guarantee whose delivery is conditional on a state finding, a guarantee whose delivery is a conditional on a state finding its 40% is a different instrument from a guarantee funded centrally on demand. That is the honest form of the question the examiner will ask, and almost nobody will have the numbers behind it. One more thing, this is the same conditional transfer pattern as SASCI, which we meet in chapter 5th, arriving in a different sector. So naming the pattern across two chapters is worth a line. So other features of the act, one line, four thematic domains, four thematic domains: water security, rural infra, rural infrastructure, livelihood infrastructure, and mitigation of extreme weather events. Integration with the PM Gati Shakti National Master Plan. 6 months for states to notify their scheme, and the administrative expenditure ceiling raised from 6 to 9%. So this is all about the two legislative resets. What is sits behind them? So India's employment problem comes to the what the state has put behind it. Three instruments, each with its budget estimates for 2026 to 2027, not its total corpus. Pradhan Mantri Vikasit Bharat Rozgar Yojana 20,083 crore, PM Setu skilling through upgrading ITS 6,141 crore, and VBJ Ramji 95,692 crores. And a labeling rule here, PM Vikasit Bharat Rozgar Yojana is frequently quoted 99,446 crores. That is the scheme's total outlay across its life, not the year. Writing it as an annual figure overstates by a factor of 5. Every scheme number in this marathon carries either total outlay or budget estimates 2026 2027. So PM Vikasit Bharat Rozgar Yojana 20,083 crores, not the 99,446 crores. It is lifetime outlay. So if India's employment problem is not the people are not working. What? India's India's employment problem is not that people are not working. It is that work is not paying simply. Most probable questions from this chapter 2026. Sir. First one, the labor codes came into force in November 2025. Assess their likely impact on formalization and worker protection. And why? UPSC examined the codes in 2024 before commencement. It has historically returned to major legislation within 1 to 2 years of it becoming operative. So second one, examine the replacement of MGNREGA by the VBG Ramji Act 2025. Does a statutory guarantee survive its transfer to a mission framework? Why? Why? The same pattern, a legislative reset in the exam year, the legislative reset in the exam year and the rural employment head has produced a question repeatedly. What separates this answer from a scheme recital is the 125-day rise and the state share gap. And then comes to the third one. India's employment challenge is one of employability rather than unemployment. Discuss. Why? Asked in this form in 2014 and in 2016, the corpus shows this framing never leaves, and the youth unemployment computation is evidence most answers will lack. So this is all about chapter number 1, employment related chapter. Then we are moving to next chapter, that is inclusive growth, chapter number 2, inclusive growth, inequality and measurement. In this chapter, 2025 asked HDI against IHDI, 2024 asked social sector expenditure, 2023 digitalization, 2022, 2019, 2017, three times asked features of inclusive growth, and 22 and 2016 asked financial question, financial inclusion, and 2021 asked GDP methodology by UPSC, and 2020 equity, and 2013 CSR. These questions asked in different examination, different years by UPSC as far as GS3 paper is concerned, particularly inclusive growth, inequality and measurement chapter is concerned. So what is this and what we have to do? 5 answers to one question. Ask how poor India was in 2022-2023. Here are 5 official or peer reviewed answers, all for roughly the same period. What are those? The first one on the Tendulkar line, 2.3%, that is 2023-2024. From Panagaria and more, cited in the economic survey. On the World Bank's extreme poverty line, the revised international line of $3 a day, according to that, 5.3%. On Niti Ayog's multidimensional poverty index, that is 11.28%. And 15.5% according to World Bank's multidimensional poverty measure. And on the World Bank's lower middle income poverty line, 23.9%. 2.3%. 2.3%. Tendulkar line, according to economic survey. A tenfold spread. Same country, same year. None of them is wrong. Why? They differ because they measure different things. A consumption line against a deprivation count, and threshold against another, monetary poverty against non-monetary poverty. That is the entire lesson of this chapter, and it is what the 2025 paper was testing when it asked for HDI against IHDI. The examiner is no longer asking what the number is. The examiner is asking whether you know what the number is for. So write this, not that. Never open an inclusive growth answer with a bare poverty figure. Open with the measure, then the figure. Like you have to write this way. On the Tendulkar line, poverty fell to 2.3% by 2023-2024 is worth a mark. But you don't have to write like this. Poverty is 2.3%, etc., etc. It is worth nothing. and may be marked wrong. So why you have, so what you have to write on the Tendulkar line, poverty fell to 2.3% by 2023 to 2024, like this. In the index comparison skeleton, what is the index comparison? What is the index comparison skeleton? Whenever UPSC asks you to distinguish two indices and it did not show twice in 20 and did so twice in 2025, use this shape. In this you have to write on 5 moves. First and foremost, what does each measure? Second one, how does the second modify the first? And third one, what does the gap between them reveal? And fourth one, what does that reveal about India specifically? And fifth one, why is the second the better guide for policy? We have to work it on the 2025 question. HDI is a summary measure of average achievement across the 3 dimensions. HDI is a summary measure of average achievement across 3 dimensions. Long and healthy life, knowledge, and a decent standard of living. Three measures. Three measures. 3 dimensions. It is computed as the geometric mean of the 3 normalized indices. When it comes to IHDI, is the same 3 dimensions discounted for how unequally each is distributed. It is the level of human development actually experienced by a typical resident. The gap between them is the loss due to inequality. The numbers from the Human Development Report 2025 and the data year is 2023. It is 2 year lag. It is 2 year lag because according to the UNDP, it gives 2025 report only, not at a released 2026 report, annual report. But you have to go with monthly reports in the particular UNDP website according for latest information. So it was 2 year lag. India's HDI is 0.685, rank 130. IHDI is 0.475. Overall loss to inequality is 30.7%. And on IHDI, India drops 10 ranks. So HDI 0.65, rank 130. IHDI 0.475. Loss to inequality 30.7%. Rank change on IHDI 10%. So the overall loss to inequality is 30.7%, and on IHDI, India drops 10 ranks. The coefficient of human inequality is 29.9%. The Guinea is 32.8%. Now the decomposition, and take these in this order. Inequality in income 37.4%. Inequality in education 36.9. Inequality in life expectancy 15.5. So the 2025 answer in 4 sentences: India loses 30.7% of its human development to unequal distribution, nearly a one third, nearly a third. Accounting for inequality drops India 10 ranks. Now read the decomposition rather than headline. Inequality in income 37.4%. Inequality in income 37.4%. Inequality in life expectancy 15.5%. Inequality education 36.9%. Coefficient of human inequality 29.9%. So inequality in education 36.9%, almost identical. While inequality in life expectancy is 15.5%, less than half of either. So the assumption that inclusive growth failure is mainly an income story does not survive the table. So therefore, IHDI is the better indicator of inclusive growth, because inclusive growth is a claim about distribution, and HDI is silent and distribution by construction. HDI does not undermeasure inequality. It does not measure it at all. The income share columns in the table come from the different data sets. India shows the richest 10% at 25.5%. The richest 1% at 23.1%, 23.1 share, implausibly close, because they are not a comparable series. Naming the shows you read the table rather than the headline. So why the top GDP? Why the GDP number candidate? Why the GDP number changed in 2015? The 2021 question asked for the methodology difference. 3 changes. First one, the base year moved from 2004-5 to 2011 to 12. And second one, the corporate database changed. The new series drew on the MCA 21 database of company filings instead of the older enterprise surveys, widening coverage of the private corporate sector. And third one is the headline aggregate changed. The old series led with GDP at factor cost. The new series leads with gross value added at basic prices and reports GDP at market prices as the headline growth number. So the difference between them is taxes and subsidies on products. That is not a technicality. It means the headline growth rate can move when indirect taxes move, independent of real output. So, and connected it back like this, the 2015 revision produced a higher growth rate for the same economy. Nothing the economy changed. Nothing in the economy changed. The instrument is changed. That is the same lesson as 5 poverty numbers and 2 development indices. Then what inclusive growth actually means? 3 questions have asked for the features of inclusive growth in 2017, 2019 and 2022. Do not answer with adjectives. Growth is inclusive when it is broad-based across sectors, not concentrated in a few high productivity enclaves. Growth is inclusive when it is broad-based across sectors, not concentrated in a few high productivity enclaves. Employment generating. It absorbs labor, which is chapter 1's argument. Distributionally sound, the IHDI test. Access expanding, health, education, finance, basic communities. And intergenerationally sustainable. It does not borrow from the future. It does not borrow from the future. And intra and intergenerational equity. Intra and intergenerational equity, the 2020 question. Intragenerational equity means what? Intragenerational equity is fairness within the present generation across income groups, regions, castes, genders. Comes to intergenerational equity is what? Intergenerational equity is fairness between the present generation and the those to come, future generations, not consuming the natural and fiscal capital from they will need. So that is the intra versus intergenerational equity. Intra means what? Within the present generation. Inter means future generation and present generation. So the two can conflict. Like cheap fossil energy today advances intra-generational equity and damages intergenerational equity. Carbon pricing does the reverse. So naming the tension rather than asserting the two are complementary is what the 2019 question was asking for when it set together. So why the GDP number changed in 2015? Base year 2004-5 to 2011-12 MCA database, and headline moved from GDP at factor cost to GVA at basic price, gross value added. So the defensible position is neither endorsement nor rejection. Capitalism versus inclusive growth or capitalism and inclusive growth. The 2014 question. The defensible position is neither endorsement nor rejection. Markets are efficient at generating growth and indifferent to its distribution. Whether growth is inclusive is therefore demanded. Whether growth is inclusive is therefore determined by what sits alongside the market. Taxation, social expenditure, regulation, public provision of health and education. The 2022 question asked exactly this. What is this? Is inclusive growth possible under a market economy? Is inclusive growth possible under a market economy? Yes, conditionally. And the conditions are the answer. What are the conditions? CSR, the 2013 question. India was the first country to make CSR spending statutorily mandatory. The implementation challenge are the answer. The implementation challenges are the answer. Concentration of spending in a few states and a few sectors, preference for visible short cycle projects over difficult long cycle ones. Compliance treated as expenditure rather than impact, and weak outcome measurement. So comes to the CSR and social sector expenditure. What is social expenditure? Social sector expenditure. 2024 question asked for this pattern, for the pattern. What is that? The trend, the whether it has been in consonance with inclusive growth. Three parts. General government social services expenditure, center and states combined. From the economic survey 2025-2026. Social service expenditure grew at a compound annual rate of 12% over 12% over financial year 2022 to financial year 26 budget estimates. Education grew at 11%, health at 8%. Education, health. The social services expenditure has risen to roughly a quarter of total government expenditure in financial year 26 budget estimates. So now the outcome indicators from the SDG National Indicator Framework Progress Report 2025. Population covered by social protection systems 22% in 2016, 64.3% in 2025. Population covered by social protection groups, social protection systems rather than groups. From 2016 to 25, increasing. Look at the increasing. Rural population using improved drinking water 94.6% in 2015 to 2016. 99.6% in 2024 and 2025. Universal household electrification achieved in 2021-2022. All districts declared open defecation free in 2019-2020. With over 96% of Swachh Bharat Mission villages at ODF plus. So what is the consonants answer? Pattern. What is the pattern? Expenditure is rising and rising faster than total expenditure. Expenditure is rising, no doubt about that. But rising faster than total expenditure. The share is up, not just the rupee amount. But within it, health lags education, 8% against 11. Argue that either way, but argue it against the decomposition rather than against an assumption. Inequality life expectancy is 15.5%, the smallest of the three dimensions, while education is 36.9 and income 37.4. That ordering can defend the current split or condemn it. So, say which way you argue and say why. Consonants. The honest verdict here is access indicators have converged sharply. Drinking water at 99.6%. Universal electrification, near universal ODF, distributional indicators have not. India still loses 30.7% of its HDI to inequality. 50%, 30.7%. On two dimensions where that loss concentrates, income at 37.4 and education at 36.9 are precisely the two where distribution has moved least. So expenditure has bought access. It has not yet bought equality of outcome. That sentence is the answer to what extent. Comes to the CSR, two lines spoken over the box. Total mandated CSR rose 39.8% from 24,966 crore in financial year 20 to 34,909 crore for financial year 2024, up by 39.8%. But the PSU share fell from 21.3 to 13.7. Education and healthcare take 55.3% of all CSR. Gender equality gets 0.6, slum development gets 0.1%. So what is this? The entire growth in Indian CSR is private sector growth, which is opposite of what was expected in 2013. One caveat here and state it. PSU CSR tracks PSU profit because the obligation is computed on average net profit. And the composition here is, I already told you, regarding education, healthcare takes 55.3 of CSR, gender equality 0.6, slum development 0.1. The mechanism in one sentence I am going to tell you, that is a mandate that fixes the amount but leaves the allocate to the firm will systematically underfund exactly the inventions where need is highest and attribution is weakest because firms select for visibility, measurability, and reputational return. And the line that ties to this chapter, at roughly 35,000 crore national CSR is a small fraction of union social sector spending. It is a supplement to public provision, never a substitute for it, which is also the answer to any question suggesting CSR can carry inclusive growth. So comes to the next scene, that is financial inclusion. What is financial inclusion? The 2016 question asked whether PMJDY, that is Prime Minister Jan Dhan Yojana, is necessary for bringing the unbanked into institutional finance. The 2022 question asked for the significance of financial inclusion for growth. The 2020 same architecture. PMJDY launched 2014, 55.02 crore PMJDY accounts as far as accounts as of March 2025, of which 36.63 crore rural and semi-urban areas, and the credit layer built on that account base. Stand Up India loans of 10 lakh to 1 crore of SC, ST and women entrepreneurs establishing greenfield enterprises. Comes to PM Swanidhi, collateral free working capital for street vendors, and PMMY for micro and small enterprise finance. Paradox to lead with what is that paradox to lead with? India has solved account access and has not solved credit access. Currently, India has solved account access, not solved credit access. 55 crore accounts is the most successful financial inclusion intervention by scale anywhere. But an account is a channel, not a service. Inclusion becomes economically meaningful only when it delivers credit, insurance, and pension. And the binding constraint has shifted from does the household have an account to can the household borrow at a formal rate. That is why the scheme architecture moved from PMJDY to Stand Up India, Swanidhi, and Mudra. The sequence is the argument: account, then transaction, then credit, then enterprise. So note also that what PMJDY enabled beyond banking. It is the settlement layer for direct benefit transfer, which is what makes the subsidy reform in Chapter 7 administratively possible at all. Then moving to the next scene, that is digitalization and the divide. The 2023 question asked for status, problems and improvements. Comes to status part. India's digital public infrastructure DPI identity payments data exchange is the widest deployed such stack in the world, and financial inclusion advanced substantially on the back of it. But widest deployed in the world is an adjective, not an answer. Why? Here is the evidence. Vahan and Sarathi run in over 1360 RTOs, holding 41.32 crore vehicle registration records and 22.56 crore driving licenses records as of December 2025. Over 200 services online and more than 80 contactless across 35 states and union territories. E-challan under one nation, one challan. 39 crore PUCCs across 49,352 centers. PM Gati Shakti brings together 57 ministries, more than 1700 plus data layers with the unified geospatial interspace opening 230 curated data sets. And ULIP integrates 44 systems and over 2000 data fields carrying 200 crore API transactions. Metis, what status of digitalization looks like as an evidence. 4 crore scale registers, 4 crore registers, 4 crore scale registries integrated and transacting 4 crore. Problems are the answer, and they are 4. Access, capability, exclusion by design, and concentration. What is the access? Device ownership, connectivity quality, and electricity reliability are not uniform across rural and urban, gender or income lines. Then comes to capability. Access without digital literacy, transfer exclusion rather than removing it. Then comes to exclusion by design. When a benefit is delivered only digitally, authentication failure becomes denial of entitlement. This is the sharpest critic and one most answers miss. Exclusion by design and concentration. A small number of platforms intermediate a very large share of digital transactions. What is the spine of this answer? The spine of the answer is India's digitalization is a state-led public infrastructure achievement and a private sector adoption gap. The supply side is unambiguous. The problems are not there. ULIP has 1700. ULIP has 1700 registered companies in an economy with 7.47 crore registered enterprises. The rails were built, they were not proportionately used. Comes to improvements part, the third of the question, most answers never reach. 3. Each specific. Design the fallback, not just the digital path. Every authentication system needs a non-digital route that does not punish the user for taking it. Open the data. Open the data. Open the data, which is what the geospatial interfaces 230 data sets begin to do. And measure farm level adoption, not government rollout. The current matrix count systems built, not systems used. The link, the link back to this charter spine. Digitalization improves the average transaction volume. The digitalization improves the average transaction volumes, coverage, speed. Whether it improves the distribution depends entirely on how is defined. The link back to this chapter spine. What is the chapter spine link is here we are going to do. We are going to understand. Digitalization improves the average transaction values, coverage, speed. Whether it improves the distribution depends entirely on who is on the wrong side of each of those 4 problems. Same question as HDI against IHDI asked about technology. So an average is a claim about a country. A distribution is a claim about its people. The examiner has started asking for the second, that is distribution is claim about its people. So what are the most probable questions from this chapter for 2026? First one, India's poverty estimates vary widely depending on the measures used. India's poverty estimates vary widely depending on the measure used. Examine the reasons and discuss which measure best serves policy. Why? Why this question? 2025 asked exactly this shape about HDI and IHDI. The poverty line revision and the divergent estimates give it a fresh vehicle. And the second question, public expenditure on social services has expanded, but distributional outcomes have not kept pace. Critically examined. Why this question? 2024 asked the consonances question, and the survey's own data now supports a sharper version. So the decomposition is what makes it sharp. And third one, The digital public infrastructure has expanded access without guaranteeing inclusion. Discuss why this question. Digitalization was asked in 2023, and the exclusion by design critique is the live policy debate. So that is the thing. And then we are moving to next chapter, that is chapter number 3. We are going to discuss, that is manufacturing, MSMEs, and industrial transformation. In this chapter, 2025 question asked protection and bilateralism, 2023 asked manufacturing GDP share and MSMEs, and 2018 asked protectionism and currency manipulation, and 2017 asked industrial growth lagging GDP, and 2017 asked labor intensive exports, and 2015 asked SEZs, and again 2015 asked make in India and skill India, and 2014 asked development without industrial base, and 2013 asked liberalization and Indian firms. Look at the questions, 9 PYQs. That is why this chapter is important. And then we are moving to the paradox. What is the paradox? Every developing economy is supposed to move workers from farms to factories to office, from primary to secondary to tertiary sector. Like, but India went from farms to offices, primary to tertiary, left the factory output, factory out, that is secondary. That is the standard story, and a large part of it is wrong. This chapter shows you which is that part. Then we are moving to scene number 2, that is the stagnation is mostly a price story. This is the scene that will separate your answer from everyone else. Everybody knows manufacturing's share of the economy has fallen. Almost nobody knows what fell. Manufacturing share measured 3 ways from the economic survey 2025-2026 as a share of gross value added in current prices. 17 to 18%. 2 decades ago, about 14% in financial year 2025. As a share of GVA, gross value added, at constant prices, about 18%. Then 2 decades ago, now 18%. So stable. And as a share of gross value output, about what? How much? 38%. 2 decades ago. Now how much? 38%. Stable. And a share of gross value output 38% stable. It is clear. And in current prices, manufacturing share fell by 3 to 4% points. Current prices. This is. Then constant prices. When constant prices, what? Did not move. In share of gross output, also it did not move. So what fell was not manufacturing. What fell was not manufacturing. What fell was manufacturing's price. Terms of trade, this is the number to carry. The ratio of the manufacturing deflator to agriculture deflator was about 1.29 in financial year 2005. Now financial 2025, 0.065, that is down by 50%. Comes to manufacturing service deflator, now 0.81 down by 21 25%. 25%. Why? The survey's explanation is structural. Manufacturing faces global competition, cost cutting technology, and narrow margins. Agriculture has government backed price support with an annual guaranteed increase. Services have pricing power. So, manufacturing is the only one of the three that cannot set its own price. 2017 answer rebuilt. The 2017 question asked why industrial growth lagged GDP growth in post reform period. The conventional answer lists constraints. The stronger answer says this: a measured substantial part of the measured lag is a relative price effect, not a real output effect. Manufacturing's constraint, price share of GVA and its share of gross value of output have both been broadly stable for 2 decades. What has deteriorated is manufacturing's terms of trade by half against agriculture since financial year 2020, 2005. The policy question is therefore not only how to make Indian produce more manufacturers, but why manufacturing cannot capture value from what it already produces. And add the employment finding from chapter 1 because it points the same way. Manufacturing's share of employment is rising 11.2% in PLFS 2022, 11.6% in 2024, then 12.1% in 2025. There is no 2023 observation in that series. So never say 3 years running. Say it rose from 11.2 to 11.2 to 12.1 between 2022 and 2025. Now hold the honest line here is none of this means the problem's imaginary. None of this means the problem is imaginary. 12% of employment and 18% of real output. A small manufacturing sector for a country at India's stage, and the employment share is rising by roughly 3/10 of a point a year. A pace the demographic window will not wait for that. The precise formulation: manufacturing is not shrinking, it is too small and growing too slowly, and it is losing pricing power while it grows. Then moving to the missed transition, the 2014 question: can India become developed without a strong industrial base? The first one is the frame, and it supports the 2017 answer to India has run three industrial policies, and naming them turns a descriptive answer into an analytical one. First phase, the protect one. It comes under 1956 to 1991. Licensing public sector commanding heights, import substitution, the state as owner and licensor, it built a capital goods base and an industry that did not have to compete and therefore did not have to improve. So then move to second phase, that is withdraw 1991 to 2014. Delicensing in this period, tariff reduction happened, foreign investment increasing. So the state is as regulator. It removed direction without replacing it with capability. So target 2020 onwards. This is the third phase and latest phase. In this phase, what happened? What is happening? The state as outcome buyer. It does not own, license, or build the factory. It pays only when the factory produces. And here is the reason industry lagged, stated precisely. After 1991, India removed the constraints on industry without removing the constraints on doing business. After 1991, what happened? India removed the constraints on what? Industry, without removing the constraints on what? Doing business. Land, power, logistics, credit, and clearances stayed slow. Services which need almost none of those things grew away from industry, which is exactly why India shifted from agriculture to services and skipped the industrial stage. So, not reforms failed, reforms removed the wrong constraints first. That sentence is worth more than a paragraph of description. That is what? Not reforms failed, reforms removed the wrong constraint first. Why services led? India's post-liberalization growth was carried by information technology, financial services, telecom, and business services. These are tradable, skill intensive, and were not constrained by the infrastructure and regulator bottlenecks that bound manufacture, that bound manufacturing. Why that matters for employment? Services of that kind absorb educated labor. They do not absorb the worker leaving agriculture with 8 years of schooling. That worker went into construction and informal services instead, which is exactly what the PLFS structure in chapter 1 shows. So the answer to can India develop without industry has three moves. First one, historically, no large economy has reached high income without an industrial phase because manufacturing is where productivity growth and mass employment have coincided. And the second one, but the historical route is narrowing. Automation is reducing manufacturing's labor intensity everywhere. So the East Asian path is not simply available for copying. And the third one is therefore the realistic goal is not to replicate Korea, but to build enough manufacturing depth for strategic security, export earnings, and mid-skill development, mid-skill employment. So while accepting that services will remain the larger sector, but the third move is the mark. Do not write an answer that says India must simply focus on manufacturing. Therefore, the realistic goal is not to replicate Korea, but to build enough manufacturing depth for strategic security, export earnings, and mid-skill employment, while accepting that services will remain the large sector. Then moving to the constraint set. Six constraints, those are. There are six constraints. Learn them as I said because they support the 2017, 2015, and 2013, 2023 alike. Comes to scale. India manufacturing firms are small and stay small. Regulatory and fiscal thresholds create incentives not to grow past designed size limit, defined size limits. Regulatory and physical threshold, fiscal threshold create incentives not to grow past defined size limits. Then comes to credit part. Small firms borrow at higher cost, or informally, or not at all. And third one, logistics cost. Freight and handling absorb a higher share of value here than in competitor economies. Fourth one, land acquisition and title. The constraint chapter 11 traces to the land records gap. Regulatory burden. Compliance density falls hardest on the firm too large to be informal and too small to have a compliance department. When it comes to research and development, low business sector R&D leaves firms competing on cost rather than on product. And sixth constraint is the one with the hardest number behind it. From the Economic Survey 2025-2026 citing DST, India's gross expenditure on R&D is 0.064%, 0.64% of GDP, against South Korea at 4.91, United States at 3.48, and China at 2.43. And the business share of the total R&D, India 41%, against South Korea 79, China 77, and the United States 75. So have to read the second row, not the first. What is that second row? Business shared of total R&D. The revealing number is 41%. In every comparator, 3/4 to 4/5 of research is funded by business. In India, it is 2/5. So state the diagnosis precisely. India's research deficit is not a what? Not a public spending failure. It is a private investment failure, not a public spending failure. It is a private investment failure, which is why raising GERD toward 2% on public money alone is fiscally implausible. Fiscally implausible. This is exactly what that announced architecture is aimed at. The Anusandhan National Research Foundation under the ARNF Act 2023. The mission programs National Quantum, NMICPS, India AI, the India Semiconductor Mission, National Green Hydrogen, the RDI and the RDI fund 1 lakh crore over 6 years with 20,000 crore for financial year 26, explicitly designed to crowd in private capital and to run deep tech fund of funds. Deep tech funds, fund of funds. The research science what? The research sentence is India's research problem is usually stated as underfunding. And the figure quoted is what? Cross expenditure on R&D at 0.64% of GDP against 2.43 in China and 3.48 in the United States. The more diagnostic number is who pays. Business funds 41% of Indian research against 75 to 79% in every comparator. India's research deficit is therefore private investment failure rather than public spending one, which is why the instrument announced the ANRF, the mission program, and 1 lakh crore RDI fund with the deep tech fund of funds are all aimed at crowding in private capital rather than substituting for it. Whether the work is a question about the demand for research inside Indian firms and not about the supply of public money. And one adjacent instrument belongs in this scene because it is constraints and an enabler at once quality control orders. 143 quality control orders covering 723 products as at 31st December 2025 against 214 products in 2019, coverage more than tripled plus 2 horizontal QCOs means quality control orders. So give both readings and let the examiner choose. QCOs rise the floor on product quality, which is a precondition for export credibility and for competing on anything other than price. They also raise compliance cost on exactly the small firms that the next scene says cannot bear it. It can operate as a non-tariff barrier that protects incumbents. The honest position here is a quality order is industrial policy, whether or not it is described as such, and it should be judged on whether domestic capability rose, not on how many products were covered. A quality order means what? A quality order is industrial policy, whether or not it is described as such, and it should be judged on whether domestic capability rose, not on how many products were covered. And there is now hard evidence for the non-tariff barrier reading. The India-EU Free Trade Agreement creates a dedicated working group on conformity assessment, expressly tasked with addressing India's system of quality control orders. A trading partner does not negotiate a standing working group over a domestic quality standard unless it reads that standard as a trade measure. So cite it on one line and the claim stops being an assertion. So liberalization and Indian firms, the 2013 question, which is this scene owns. The record is mixed. The mixedness, the mixedness is the answer. Indian firms competed successfully where scale, brand, and distribution mattered domestically and in services. The competed less well in capital and technology intensive segments where global incumbents held decades of accumulated R&D. Liberalization did not uniformly help or harm domestic firms. It sorted them by sector. The labor intensive versus capital intensive. The 2017 question asked why manufacturing failed to deliver labor intensive exports. It remained one of the most answerable questions in the corpus. Why capital intensity rose in a labor abundant economy? Four reasons. First one, regulatory threshold made a labor quasi fixed cost. So firms substituted capital for labor at the margin. And the second one is skill mismatch meant labor was cheap but not always productive at the required quality standard. And the third one is scale requirements in export markets favored mechanized consistent production over labor intensive craft production. And fourth one, sectoral composition. India's export strength lay in petroleum products, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, and engineering, which are capital intensive by nature rather than appeal and footwear. The 2015 question, Make in India depends on Skill India and radical labor reforms, was asking the same thing from the other end. In 2015, that was a prediction. You are answering after the four labor codes came into force on 21st November 2025. Say so, then cross refer to chapter 1 for the course content and the balanced assessment. Do not relitigate them here. And next scene, that is MSMEs and the missing middle. What is MSMEs and missing middle? The 2023 question paid manufacturing GDP with MSMEs deliberately. They are one problem, the structural picture. India's enterprise distribution is barbell shaped. Very many micro firms, a few large firms, and a thin band in between. The missing middle is not an accident of history. It is produced by the incentive structure, benefits, exemptions, and simplified compliance attached to smallness. So the marginal cost of growing past a threshold can exceed the marginal benefit. So why it matters for the manufacturing question? Exports productivity growth and formal employment come disproportionately from mid-sized and large firms. An economy of micro enterprises can generate livelihoods without generating competitiveness. Policy production. What is the policy production here? Four levers. Make thresholds taper rather than cliff edge. So growth is not punished. Move credit assessment from collateral to cash flow and transaction date, which digital public infrastructure now makes feasible. Attach support to capability upgrading, technology, quality certification, design rather than to size alone. And use cluster and supply chain linkage to give small firms access to scale without requiring them to become large. So now comes to the numbers. From the Economic Survey 2025-2026, MSMEs are 31.1% of GDP. 35.4% of manufacturing output, both NSO 2023 and 2024, and 48.58% of exports, TGCI and S 2024 and 2025. Udyam carries more than 7.47 crore registered enterprises, reporting more than 32.82 crore persons, and that is the portal data as on 9th January 2026. So state the date. Two computations, and the first one is the missing middle expressed as a single number. 32.82 crore persons across 7.47 crores enterprise is about 4.4%, 4.4 persons per enterprise. That is the average Indian registered MSME, a firm of 4 or 5 people. Every argument in this scene about scale, credit access, certification, and export capability follows from that one ratio. You do not have a missing middle problem in the abstract. You have an economy whose average registered firm employs between 4 and 5 people. Say average, not median. This is a mean, and a barbell distribution to median would be lower still, which if anything strengthens the point. And second one is MSME are more dominant in manufacturing than in economy as a whole. 35.4% of manufacturing output against 31.1% of GDP and 48.5% of exports. So the sector, the rest of this chapter says it is too small, is a sector in which small firms already need half of the exporting. This constraint is not MSME absence, it is MSME size. And the credit turn, which is new this year from the RBI monetary policy report of October 2025, MSME credit grew 18.5% year on year in August 2025 against large industries 1.8%. A factor of 10, MSME credit was the primary driver of industrial credit growth in the first half of the financial year 2026. It is attributed to the April 2025 revised classification thresholds, which expanded priority sector eligibility to jewelry-backed small business lending and to NBFCs as last mile providers. Supporting instruments, one line in each. What is that? CGTMSE was revamped on a 1st April 2023 with a 9,000 crore corpus infusion, raising the guarantee ceiling from 2 crore to 5 crore, and from 1st April 2025 the ceiling doubled again to 10 crore. The self-reliant India Fund has a 50,000 crore 50,000 crore corpus with 15,442 crore deployed across 682 MSMEs as on 30 November 2025, 30.9% of the corpus. And SME IPO listings rose 87.2% between 2022-23 and 2024-25. But keep the counterweight in the same breath. The World Bank's India Financial Sector Assessment of June 2025 finds what 27% of MSMEs still identify access to finance as their single biggest obstacle. Credit is growing fast from a base that leaves more than a quarter of the sector credit constrained. Say the growth, then say the base. Then we are moving to next scene, that is enclaves and ecosystems. Here is the 2015 question, 12 and a half marks verbatim. There is a clear acknowledgement that special economic zones are a tool of industrial development, manufacturing, and exports. Recognizing this potential, the whole instrumentality of SEDS require augmentation. discuss the issue plaguing the success of SEZs with respect to taxation, governing laws, and administration. The question names its own three heads. Answer under those three and nothing else. The numbers from the Department of Commerce Annual Report to 2025-2026 as on 30 November 2025, 417 formal approvals, 353 notified, land identified, zone legally constituted, 276 operational and exporting, holding 6,695 units. Employment 31 lakh, 31.77 lakh, 31 lakh 77,893, of which 30 lakh 43,189 is incremental after February 2026. Investment 7 lakh 82,192 crore to 31st March 2025. Exports 14 lakh 63,699 crore exports in 2024-2025, up 8%. Asia's first export processing zone was at Kandla, 1965. The SEZ Act came in 2005 and took effect with the rules on 10th February 2006. And here is the finding that answers question directly. Of 267 what operational SEZs, 167 are IT or ITES. So 60.5% multi-product. So IT or ITES what? How many? 167 means how much percentage? 6.5, 60.5%. Multi-product zones, the ones closest to the industrial development and manufacturing. Purpose the question names number 25 to 9.1%. Act was built to supply quality infrastructure plus a fiscal package. A software exports binding constraint is tax, not infrastructure. So an enclave designed to solve an infrastructure problem was taken up mostly by an industry that did not have one. So on the attrition is 417 approvals, became 353 notifications, became 276 operational zones, 66.2 reached operation. 77 notified SEZs are not exporting. Notification means land identified and zone legally constituted. So that is land notified for a purpose is not serving. Comes to taxation and this is where the answer is 1. Because most candidates assert it without evidence. Section 10AA gave a 15-year profile. 15-year profile. The MAT exemption, the MAT exemption was withdrawn with effect from 1st April 2022. 1st April 2012, and the unit sunset took effect from 1st April 2021. But the deeper reason is external. On 31st October 2019, the WTO dispute settlement panel held that India's export-related schemes, including the SEZ scheme, were prohibited subsidies under the agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures. India appealed under that agreement. A subsidy contingent on export performance is prohibited outright. So the scheme's central design feature was not merely expensive, it was a impermissible under commitments India had already made. So the concessions were not withdrawn capriciously. On governing laws, an SEZ is a legal enclave, a different rule book inside the fence that works when the binding constraint is rules. It does not work when the constraint is ecosystem because suppliers, skills and logistics do not respect a fence. An administration, single window clearance inside the zone cannot compensate for multi window clearance outside it. Proposals go to a board of approval on state recommendation, and each zone is headed by a development commissioner. The three-way trap, the best part of the answer, and why no SEZ reform has passed. The WTO constraint says you may not condition the benefit of exports. The customs constraint says that without an export test and physical contiguity, you cannot police the boundary. The fiscal equity constraints ask why a benefit available inside a boundary is not available outside it. Any two can be satisfied, all three cannot. Comes the DESH bill announced in the budget of February 2022, tried to satisfy the first, removing the net foreign exchange test and the direct tax incentives explicitly for WTO compliance, renaming SEZs development hubs and allowing production for both domestic and export markets. State that the status narrowly. In these words, the DESH bill was announced in the 2022 budget to redesign the scheme around the WTO finding. It has not been enacted, and the Department of Commerce's own annual report for 2025-2026 describes the SEZ scheme as operating with no replacement legislation referenced. Do not say withdrawn. Do not say bill was introduced or passed. Do not say SEZ 2.0 is notified, and do not quote the reported 15% corporate rate. And the constructive half is from enclave to cluster. An enclave asks what rules apply inside the fence. A cluster asks what capabilities exist in this place. From the economic survey's own box, China's Greater Bay, China's Greater Bay Area generates 35% of national exports and 11% of GDP on under 1% of the land. Vietnam's two key economic regions contribute nearly two-thirds of GDP and trade on 11% of the land. And India's own example, Nashik's luggage ecosystem, where Samsonite's facility is now the world's largest by value. NICDP Phase 1 cities, Dholera, Shendra, Pitkin, Greater Noida, and Vikram Udyogpuri are operational, with 350 slots allotted and 2.02 lakh crore of investment. And the National Manufacturing Mission encodes the shift. 20 to 30 prioritized clusters, not 14 sectors, not FNs, places. The SEZ sentence, India's special economic zones are the best assessed under the three heads of the question names and governing laws. The 2005 Act created a legal enclave which works the constraint is regulation and not when it is ecosystem. An administration, 417 approvals, produced 353 notifications, and only 276 operational zones, and 167 of those are ITR, ITES, and instrument built. Supply industrial infrastructure was taken up mainly by a sector whose constraint was fiscal. We discussed already on taxation. Usual account is that advent, that is incomplete, etc., and panel prohibited subsidies, etc. And that is why augmentation has proved so hard. So the WTO forbids conditioning the benefits on exports. Customs cannot police a zone without export test contiguity. And the physical equity asks why the boundary should exist at all. So then we are moving to the end of hyper globalization. The 2018 question asked about protectionism and currency manipulation. The 2025 question asked what India does when the world moves from free trade and multilateralism to protection and bilateralism. 7 years apart, the same question, and the second one has an answer, the first two did not. The answer is the bilateral term, and India has negotiated it. But say the status precisely because it matters. The India EU agreement is not in force. Negotiations concluded in January 2026. Entry into force requires approval by the Council of European Union, the consent of the European Parliament, and approval by the Union Council of Ministers in India. Both sides have reaffirmed a target of entry into force in 2027. Until then, Indian exports to the EU remain subject to MFN tariffs, that is most favored nation tariffs. No preference flows. Say concluded, never say in force, and never say the tariff cuts have happened. The agreement itself concluded 27th January 2026 at the 16th India EU summit. Preferential entry into EU over 99% of Indian exports by trade value. Tariffs up to 10% to go to zero, and entry into force on roughly $33 billion of the labor intensive exports, textiles, apparel, leather, footwear, marine products, gems and jewelries, etc. And services, the EU opens 144 subsectors to India, and India opens 102 to the EU. Comes to mobility, EU commitments in 37 sectors for contractual service suppliers and 17 for independent professionals, plus intra-cooperate transfers and business visitors and framework to engage on social security agreements over a 5-year horizon. On CBAM, on CBAM, in CBAM, most favored nation assurance extending to India any flexibility granted to third countries. It's technical cooperation and recognition of carbon prices, safeguarded with no market access, dairy, cereals, poultry, soya meal, and certain fruits and vegetables. The EU becomes the India's 22nd FTA partner, and there is that dedicated working group of conformity assessment covering India's quality control orders. Comes to the scale. For scale, bilateral goods trades 2024-2025 stood at 13.5 $136.54 billion dollars, export 78.85 75 export 75.85 billion, import 60.68 billion. Services trade reached 83.10 billion dollars in 2024. And there is a trap in the source document. The release headline $70 billion of export poised for takeoff. That figure is India's existing 2024-2025 goods export to the EU, not an incremental gain from the agreement. Not right that the FTA will add $75 billion to exports. Right that it gives preferential access to an export flow currently worth that much. The 2025 answer, India's response to the collapse of multilateralism, has the three components, and the FTA is only the first. One, substitute bilateral access for multilateral access. The EU, UK, EFTA agreements together will open most of the European market, 22 FTA partners. Two, second one, move up the tariff exposure ladder. The $33 billion at stake is precisely the labor intensive basket, which is where India's employment interest and its trade interest coincide. The previous scene's problem addressed through the market access rather than domestic reform. 3. Negotiate the non-tariff frontier CBAM. The live example, carbon border adjustment is a trade barrier arriving in environmental clothing, and FTS MFN assurance is a defensive instrument against it, as it is the confirmatory assessment, conformity assessment working group, which is the same fight over QCO from the other side. And the honest counterpoint here is which the answer needs bilateral agreements fragment the trading system that India spent 3 decades arguing for. Each one is a preference, and preferences erode the non-discrimination principle at the heart of the WTO. Inside is now beneficiary of a system it once opposed on principle, naming the tension in the difference between a report and an agreement. Then India's manufacturing problem is not that it makes too little. It is that it captures too little from what it makes. Then moving to the most probable questions for 2026. First one, assess the India EU free trade agreement significance for India's labor intensive exports and industrial strategy. Why? Why this question probable? Concluded January 2026, and the corpus shows UPSC examines major trade agreements within a year or two. The 2025 protectionism question already reached for this territory, and note the agreement will still not be in force on the exam day. An answer that says so is stronger than one that does not. And second one, the declining share of manufacturing in India's GVA reflects the relative prices more than real output. Critically examined. Why? The survey advances this argument explicitly this year. And the 2017 industrial growth question is its natural vehicle. Third one, the missing middle constraints India's manufacturing. Competitiveness more than the absence of large firms. Discuss. Why? 2023 paid manufacturing with MSMEs. So the pairing is the examiner's own. So with these 3 chapters completed, in the next class we are going to discuss the 4th chapter, that is fiscal sustainability and the quality of expenditure.